When trust collides, the shocking truth behind my breakup and rebound. I never thought I'd be questioning everything about my relationships. But here I am, staring at the walls of my apartment, trying to piece together where it all went wrong. 4 years of love, plans for the future, and the hope of a lifetime together with Julie. All of it shattered in a whirlwind of confusion, jealousy, and betrayal. And then there's Mindy. It still feels surreal, like a twisted plotline from a movie. Julie and I had what everyone called a picture-perfect relationship. We loved each other deeply, shared our lives in ways that felt like they could withstand anything, and even discussed marriage with a sense of certainty that few couples experience. But now, looking back, I realize that one whisper in the wrong ear, one subtle nudge, can unravel everything you've worked to build. It all began subtly, just a few months ago, when I noticed Julie was pulling away from me. I tried to ignore it, to write it off as stress or just a phase. But the shift was undeniable. And then came Mindy, Julie's friend and coworker. Mindy, a supportive friend who seemed eager to help when I was lost, confused, and desperate for answers. As the truth started coming to light, I was blindsided. Could it be that the very person I'd confided in was also the reason my relationship was crumbling? Or was Julie struggling with fears of her own, insecurities she couldn't share with me? The more I looked, the more the pieces didn't fit. And each question only made me sink deeper into a sea of doubt. My heart was divided, torn between the love I still felt for Julie and the unexpected comfort Mindy offered in the most painful days of my life. I wish I could say it was easy to pick up the pieces. But the reality was far messier, tangled in accusations, misunderstandings, and regrets that neither of us saw coming. And somewhere in all of this, a lesson was waiting to be learned about love, trust, and the things we sometimes don't say that matter most. In the beginning, the changes were almost imperceptible. Julie started coming home a little later than usual, often looking preoccupied. I'd catch her staring off into space, her expression veiled with a heaviness I couldn't quite understand. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd respond with a slight smile, brushing off my concerns. "It's just work," she'd say. Or, "I'm probably just tired." It was enough to calm me, at least for a while. But an unsettling feeling began growing within me. A few weeks into this phase, I got a message from Mindy, Julie's friend from work. It seemed innocent enough at first. She asked if we could meet because there was something important she thought I should know about Julie. The message threw me off balance. What could Julie's friend possibly need to discuss with me alone? But my curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet her. We met at a quiet cafe after work. Mindy's face was a mask of sympathy, and she hesitated before speaking, as if reluctant to deliver some harsh truth. "I don't mean to pry," she began, "but I thought you should know. Julie's been talking about wanting to take a break." My heart sank. Just hearing those words felt like someone had punched me in the gut. A break? After 4 years together? After everything we'd built? In the conversation that followed, Mindy painted a picture of a conflicted Julie, uncertain about her feelings and questioning her readiness for commitment. She claimed Julie had confided in her, saying she didn't know if she was ready to settle down. As I sat there, absorbing every word, I felt a mixture of betrayal and panic. I had thought Julie and I were on the same page about our future. In fact, I was planning to propose over the holidays. How could I have been so wrong? Trying to make sense of it, I left the cafe feeling like I'd just woken up in a strange, unfamiliar world. That night, I lay awake, memories flooding my mind. Moments we'd spent laughing, dreaming, planning our life together, now felt tainted with doubt. Had she been putting on an act this whole time? I kept telling myself it couldn't be true, that Julie loved me as deeply as I loved her. But Mindy's words wouldn't leave my mind, haunting me with possibilities I hadn't considered before. I decided to act on the information Mindy had given me, trying to reignite the spark. As I told myself, I planned elaborate date nights, took Julie to her favorite restaurants, and even surprised her with weekend getaways. But her reaction was always the same, a strained smile and a vague expression that left me feeling emptier each time. The more I tried, the more she seemed to pull away, as if each effort pushed her further out of reach. Finally, in late November, Julie told me she wanted to talk. I felt a chill run through me as she sat me down, her face calm but resolute. "I think I need some time on my own," she said softly, her words hanging in the air. She tried to reassure me, saying it wasn't about someone else, just a chance to get clarity. But my mind was already racing, my heart shattering with each sentence. I didn't understand. If she loved me, why would she need time away from me? It felt like a betrayal, even if she insisted it wasn't. After years of togetherness, she was suggesting separation, even if only for a while. We argued, the emotions that had simmered between us now boiling over. In my anger and hurt, I lashed out, questioning her loyalty, her love, her commitment. She listened in silence, her face pale and drawn, until finally, she walked out of our apartment, leaving behind a void that I couldn't begin to fill. That night, I sat alone, trying to convince myself that I'd done the right thing, that I couldn't accept such uncertainty from the person I loved. The weeks that followed were a blur of loneliness and confusion. I'd wake up each day hoping it had all been a bad dream, that she would walk back through the door and we could pretend none of it had happened. But each morning, the silence grew louder, and my heart grew heavier. On New Year's Eve, I hosted a small gathering, hoping a night of laughter with friends might dull the pain. Among the friends was Mindy. She was warm, sympathetic, and after everyone else had left, she stayed behind to help clean up. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, we'd crossed a line I never thought I'd cross. I felt guilty, conflicted, but in that moment, her presence was a comfort I desperately needed. In the days that followed, Mindy continued to be a steady presence, checking in on me, encouraging me to move forward, even when I was filled with doubts. But just as I was starting to feel something resembling peace, Julie reappeared. It was early one Sunday morning when I heard the furious pounding on my door. Half awake, I stumbled to answer, only to find Julie standing there, her face a storm of anger and hurt. Before I could say a word, she unleashed a torrent of accusations, calling me unfaithful, accusing me of betraying her trust. And then, as her eyes landed on Mindy, who was in the living room, I saw a flash of realization cross her face. The hurt in her eyes cut deeper than any words she could have said. "Why?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "Why would you choose her?" I stammered, struggling to find words, but she didn't want to hear them. She went on to reveal something that shook me to my core. She believed Mindy had manipulated both of us, driving a wedge between us just to satisfy her own motives. The woman who had been my comfort was now cast in a different light, and I was left questioning everything I thought I knew about the people closest to me. As Julie stood in front of me, her tear-streaked face softening into a look of vulnerability, I felt the full weight of everything we'd lost, and what we might still salvage. For the first time, it felt like we were truly seeing each other, stripped of misunderstandings and insecurities. She opened up about her fears, her regrets, and the doubts she had confided in Mindy. I listened, each word a reminder of how fragile our relationship had become when left unspoken. When she spoke of her parents' rocky marriage, I finally understood why she'd wanted to step back, why she'd felt so hesitant about taking our relationship to the next level. Her fear of falling into the same patterns her parents had known was something she'd never shared with me, fearing it would sound irrational. But hearing it now, I realized it wasn't just irrationality, it was a lifetime of watching love falter under pressure. And she'd been terrified of repeating it. That was her reason for needing space, her reason for hesitating when I was ready to move forward. And then there was Mindy, the person we'd both let come between us. In her own way, Mindy had been dealing with her issues too, trying to find a place in a life where she felt overlooked. While her actions weren't justified, they were, in a sense, understandable. In the end, she wanted to be someone's priority. She'd woven herself into our lives with subtlety, using our vulnerabilities to find a place in our story. But now, standing here, I saw that her influence didn't have to define us. Our relationship wasn't about Mindy or the mistakes we'd made. It was about whether we could rebuild from here. Despite all that had happened, I looked at Julie and felt something shift. She was no longer the distant figure from the last few months, nor the confident partner I'd first fallen in love with. She was something deeper, a person learning to trust herself, and maybe even me. Once again, I told her I was willing to cut all ties with Mindy, to start fresh if she was willing to do the same. She nodded, adding that she was ready to work on her own fears, her need for independence, and her desire for a relationship rooted in equality and shared understanding. That night, we both agreed to take things slowly. There was no rush to rekindle the spark that once burned so brightly. Instead, we'd focus on rebuilding trust. One honest conversation at a time. We decided to see a therapist together, each of us learning how to communicate openly, without letting fears or past experiences cloud our judgment. It wasn't about erasing what had happened but about growing from it, about learning to see each other not as perfect partners but as two flawed people willing to make things work. Julie and I moved forward with caution but also with hope. Our relationship had weathered the kind of storm many would have walked away from. But we had decided that the love we shared was worth fighting for. In the months that followed, we rebuilt, slowly, intentionally. Our lives became a mosaic of small efforts. Every piece of trust we rebuilt becoming part of something stronger than before. As for Mindy, she became a shadow from our past, a reminder of the cost of secrecy and manipulation. Julie's condition that I cut all ties with her was easy to follow. And even when Mindy reached out once or twice afterward, I kept my distance. I'd made my choice, and that choice was Julie. In time, even the memory of her faded, replaced by the everyday rhythms of life with the person I'd truly wanted by my side. Now, as I look back on everything, I see the lessons we both learned about vulnerability, trust, and the importance of speaking up. If there's one thing I hope others can take from our story, it's this: love requires openness. Even when it's hard, it requires setting aside fears and learning to be honest, not just with each other but with ourselves. There will always be outside forces, people, circumstances, doubts, that test our bond. But if we remember why we chose each other in the first place, if we're willing to work through the mistakes, then maybe, just maybe, we can find a way back to the love that started it all. Julie and I now look forward to a future together, one where we've learned to value each other in ways we didn't before. And as we take each step forward, we carry with us a quiet understanding that love isn't about perfection, it's about resilience, forgiveness, and the courage to choose each other again, every single day. Trapped between love and family, a heartbreaking tale of boundaries and self-rescue. I never imagined my life would take this turn. When I met Sarah, I was sure that I had found my forever. She was everything I'd ever wanted: intelligent, driven, gentle, and compassionate. Our love blossomed over 4 beautiful years. And after a while, it just made sense to propose. I thought this would be the start of a new life together, free from pain and full of mutual dreams. But I never anticipated that our relationship would unravel so painfully, tugged apart by invisible threads that had bound her long before she met me. Sarah's past was something she rarely talked about. She was an only daughter with 2 brothers, and her childhood had been harsh and abusive. Her parents, she once confessed, were raging narcissists, treating her like an outsider. Her brothers received the love, the protection, and the privilege, while Sarah was left to fend for herself. They had used her as a scapegoat for everything that went wrong in their lives. Despite all this, Sarah pushed forward. She worked hard, got a scholarship, and fought for a career she was proud of. It was clear that she was determined to carve a life for herself, far from the shadows of her family's toxic influence. But even though Sarah had escaped physically, she was still tethered emotionally. It was like watching a person bound by invisible chains, tied to a family that had only hurt her. I had always supported her efforts to maintain boundaries with them, hoping that, with time, her strength would carry her through. But as our wedding date drew closer, those boundaries began to crumble, and her family's grasp over her became relentless. The real trouble began about a year before our wedding. Her family started visiting more frequently, each time acting as if they owned our home. The first time her parents came over, I thought it would be a simple, polite visit, but they arrived without warning, marching in like royalty. Her mother inspected every corner, making biting remarks about our furniture choices, and rearranged the kitchen as if it were her own. Her father took over the living room, switching the TV to his favorite channel and criticizing every little thing I did or said. I tried to stay composed. For Sarah's sake, she stood quietly in the corner, visibly tense, her eyes darting between her parents and me. The worst part was her father's dismissive, patronizing attitude. He would sneer at my job, making backhanded comments about my career choices and constantly suggesting that I man up if I wanted to keep up with the family. Her brothers would drop by occasionally, chiming in with smug remarks, treating our home like a weekend dump. Every time they left, The place was trashed, and Sarah and I were left to clean up the mess. At first, I tried to talk to her about it. "Sarah," I'd say gently, "this isn't right. Your family treats you like an accessory. They come here, disrespect you, and just leave." She would nod, but then, almost as if in a trance, defend them, telling me I didn't understand their dynamic. She would excuse their behavior with stories of her childhood, moments where she felt she had fallen short, and the guilt would wrap around her, paralyzing her. Their influence wasn't only physical, it was financial as well. Her family started depending on her for money, guilting her into sending monthly support. This wasn't just a few $100s, it was significant enough to impact our plans. She was paying for her parents' luxuries while we budgeted to keep our own lives stable. Any attempt I made to talk about this led to the same story. They were her family, and they needed her. I watched, feeling helpless as her family drained her emotionally and financially, enjoying their control over her life. One evening, her mother demanded that we foot the bill for a trip they wanted to take, implying that we owed them for all they had done for Sarah. I could barely hold my frustration, but Sarah remained silent, agreeing to her mother's demands. Later that night, when we were alone, she broke down, sobbing quietly. I held her, my heart aching, but I knew I couldn't be the one to fix this for her. It was clear something had to give. As our wedding approached, I found myself spiraling into a constant state of frustration and dread. I wanted to marry Sarah, but the idea of tying my life permanently to hers, with her family so enmeshed, felt suffocating. One night, after another exhausting visit from her parents, I took a deep breath and said, "Sarah, I need to talk to you. This isn't sustainable. I love you, but I can't spend my life in a war with your family. They're abusive, Sarah. They don't love you, they control you. And it's tearing us apart." She looked at me, stunned, as though I'd said something completely foreign. She started to shake her head, denying my words, insisting that her family wasn't as bad as I was making them out to be. But I pushed forward. "You deserve love, respect, and a life free from their demands. You've worked so hard to build a life for yourself. But every time you let them back in, they destroy it. I can't stand by and watch you break yourself for people who only bring you pain." I told her that I wanted to delay the wedding until she could set boundaries with her family. Her face twisted with anger. She accused me of not understanding her upbringing, of being selfish, of wanting to isolate her. The argument escalated, and eventually, she told me to leave. I felt my heart break as I packed a few things and left for a hotel. Over the next few days, I tried to keep my distance, hoping that the time apart would allow her to see things more clearly. On a Saturday, I ignored her texts and calls, even when she sent frantic messages, desperate for help as her family swarmed her. I needed her to face them on her own, to see the reality of what life with them was really like without me as her shield. That night, she finally broke. I came back to find her sobbing in the living room, barely able to speak. She hugged me tightly, apologizing over and over, saying that she finally saw what her family was doing to her. She promised to work on setting boundaries, but she needed my help. For a while, it seemed like we might find a way forward. She agreed to look into selling her house so that we could start fresh somewhere else, far from her family's grasp. She even considered premarital counseling, something I had suggested many times. But soon after, her family's influence seeped back in. She began echoing their criticisms, accusing me of being controlling, of trying to turn her against her family. It was clear they had manipulated her yet again. I realized then that I was fighting a losing battle. She was still bound to them, no matter how much I loved her, no matter what I did to help. My heart broke as I told her that I was done, that I couldn't live like this anymore. I packed my things and left, knowing that she had chosen them over me. Walking away was the hardest thing I've ever done. I still think about her sometimes, wonder if she ever managed to break free. But I know now that you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Love, as powerful as it is, isn't always enough. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is to let them go, to give them the space to find their own strength. In the end, I've learned the importance of boundaries, of self-respect, and of the courage it takes to walk away when love isn't enough. My hope is that someday, she finds the strength to rescue herself. But I know now that it's a journey she has to take alone.